Hi, this is Jay Holcomb. I'm the Director of International Bird Rescue Research Center, and I thought I'd give you an update on the pelican crisis we've experienced in the first quarter of this year. It's been a long time. From the beginning of January, we started at both of our centers in California, our Cordelia Center based here in the northern part of San Francisco Bay, and our San Pedro Center, which is in the Long Beach area in the LA region at the mouth of the LA River. We started seeing pelicans come in, I mean literally pouring in, and so what we noticed that was unusual about this is 99% of them were adult birds, many of them going into their breeding plumage, which you can see some of them behind me look like this, and very few juveniles, and they were showing up starving, acting strange, landing on highways, wandering around. And one of the other big clues that it was unusual is a lot of them were soaking wet. So as I've explained before, birds' feathers are naturally waterproof. It's our mantra here at International Bird Rescue Research Center. Birds' feathers naturally repel water. So if you have a wet bird, there's something on the feathers making it wet. So we started seeing these birds that were weak and cold in these big rainstorms we were having in February, and we would go out there and there would be healthy looking birds that were dry, and then massive amount of birds that were soaking wet. It looked like they just came out of a wash tub, and that's unusual and just quite not right. So we started catching these birds, and people started bringing them to us, and of course the numbers of animals started coming in and all the phone calls at both centers, and what we found out is that in fact, we had starving birds. So number one is, and with all the necropsies and everything that's been done on the dead birds, they were basically said they're starving. So the big question is why? No one really knows why. Obviously, there's not food available to them, or they're not able to get their food. And the thing to know about pelicans is that they're surface feeders. They plunge feed, and they feed within a foot or two of the surface of the water. So their fish has to be on the top of the water. If the fish go down, which they sometimes do, if the water currents change temperature, then cormorants, grebes, and other murres and other birds can go down and get them, but surface feeding birds cannot get them. There weren't any terns in the area at the time, so the terns weren't really affected by that, and they ate a lot of the little tiny fish anyways, but pelicans who need a lot of fish were being affected. So the fish wasn't there for one thing, so that was part of the starvation. The other big clue was how we had soaking wet birds, and we couldn't really figure out why. And so we've sent in feather samples and to the Fish and Game labs with the division that's called IBRRC, the Oil Spill Prevention and Response Division that does oil spills, and they're kind enough to look at the feathers. So far, nothing really has come up on them. They haven't found anything unusual, but they're still looking into it, and we're going to be looking into having other labs look at it too when we get a chance. See what's on their feathers. We made the comment to the media that, you know, they got a lot of pollution on them from all the runoff from the rains, and what we really meant by that, and I think it's valid, is that when all these rains were happening and everything flushes off the streets and goes into the harbors and out to the ocean, there's, you know, grease from your car and stuff from restaurants, and everybody plays a little bit, and it gets in the water. But the other big unusual thing about it is that there's not a lot of other wet birds. It's only pelicans. So what's different about them? Well, that's a clue, but nobody really has the answer to it. And then the other thing is that was really difficult for our staff and volunteers is that we were getting calls from lots of people every day coming to rescue their pelicans. We were literally inundated, and at the facility I'm at in Cordelia, we at one point had 100 pelicans in-house. This cage can hold 100 or more if it has to. It's a little smelly and it's full, but it can do it. But we were pretty much full of pelicans. At our center in San Pedro, at one point they had over 200 pelicans in-house. And we're really set up to handle 100 is max, so it was literally wall-to-wall pelicans. And people were calling, telling us that, you know, these birds are kind of landing on streets, begging for food. We had people say they went into stores begging for fish. We had somebody, they landed on their barbecue stealing their chicken. We had all sorts of, you know, walking into all sorts of businesses and things, literally looking for food because they were starving. And then lots of people saying, come and get this pelican. Well, after a while, we couldn't even go get all the pelicans. And then there was a little bit of an outcry, like, why aren't you taking all the pelicans? Well, we only had so much room. At the same time, the biologists are saying, well, maybe it's a natural die-off. It is an El Nino year, which means currents and everything change and the weather, and you should just leave them to die. Well, we all know we can't just leave all of them, and we certainly didn't go out and look for all the birds in the harbors and on the breakwaters, because if we did, we would have thousands of them. But what we did was get the ones that people would bring us, so the ones that were in the streets that had to be picked up. And we literally would stop on the highway and pick up pelicans that were getting hit by cars and things. So it was pretty wild. And it's slowed down a little bit now, and it looks like it's coming to an end, we're hoping. And so far, just in the last 2.5 months, we've had 545 California brown pelicans come to our center. We've released about 322. There's 70 to 80 in-house between the two centers right now. And the birds that didn't make it were ones that came in that were dying when they came in, or were euthanized because they were so sick there was no way to keep them. And we also had some that were injured by seals, because we had seal bites, which we see occasionally in Southern California, where people will feed sea lions and the pelicans go in to look for food and the seals get aggressive and bite them. So we've had a number of things all happening at the same time. So we're hoping it's the end of this for now. And the really interesting thing, besides all those little pieces of information, is that typically in a year, I tell everybody, we take 400 to 600 pelicans in for a whole calendar year between both centers. Well, we've already had 545, so this is probably going to be the biggest year we ever had, and we're not even into April yet, so we're praying that it'll slow down for us. But of course, number one is we're concerned about the birds, and nobody really knows why all this is happening. And like I said before, one of the big clues is that these are all beautiful adult birds. These aren't juveniles that are trying to figure out how to take care of themselves, and they make mistakes and they die. And we know that in predator species like a pelican, 80% of them, 80% of the young, I should say, can die off in the first year. It's the way it works in nature. And then the other percentage lives to carry on the population. Well, in this case, there were hardly any young, maybe a few, and they were all adults. And so we're not sure why they're dying off. But there is another point too before I close, and that is that the pelicans are a great conservation success story, and they were, to the brink of extinction in the 60s and 70s because of DDT, and that all turned around, and they've been an endangered species till just last year or this year when they were taken off the list. And we had people say to us, do you think it's too early? And I said, well, we're now seeing algae events, domoic acid events, weird die-offs in behavior of all these birds, and pelicans are always an indicator animal because they're high up on the food chain. So of course it's too early to take them off the endangered list. That's just my and our opinion. But this kind of shows evidence of that we're not really sure what's going on out there. There's a lot of implications, but nobody really knows. So to wrap this up, I just want to say that we're going to keep looking and see if we can answer some of these questions. What's on their feathers? Why are adult birds starving? Where are the fish? And what it means for their future. In the meantime, thank you to everyone who has donated. We had incredible support from people, and it covered the majority of our costs. For a fish, of course, that costs a lot of money, and medication and water and utilities. So we appreciate that a lot, and thank you.